Of course, what I haven't heard so much being spoken about was the role of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and that is not, of course, my topic, but it is important because the Serbian Orthodox Church throughout the entire time was helping with unity in the church outside of the borders of Russia. It was the desire to do so, and that was accepted and blessed by His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon, who writes to Patriarch Dimitrije in a letter that I found in the archives in Belgrade. Our heart is even more filled with the feeling of joy and thankfulness to your beatitude, that we feel all the good that was done and is being done by you in regards to the Russian exiles, the bishops, clerics, and laymen who were left outside the borders of their native land due to the power of the events and found themselves the hospitality and asylum within the borders of the Serbian Patriarchate. May the Lord return to you 100-fold for this blessed work. May the days of your patriarchal service be blessed. End quote. It was understood that the Serbian Church was assisting with this, blessing this, helping this. And it was understood that these churches, these dioceses were working together and that they would do as much possible in order to stay united spiritually and administratively while they were not able to be in contact with the Mother Church regularly. In the North American diocese, there was much discussion about many different decrees Archbishop Alexander had received from the higher church authority. Although the Diocesan Council did not say that it would not accept the decrees, it reiterated numerous times that it chooses for the church in North America to remain directly under the direct auspices of His Holiness Tikhon. But this necessarily was not the understanding of Patriarch Tikhon. Of course, he thought them to be and understood them to be a part of the indivisible Russian Orthodox Church. But he understood that he physically could not run the church being under the Soviet oppression. It's important to know that this showed not only the support that he was giving, but also that he understood that he himself could not be involved in all day-to-day activities. One example of this is when Archpriest Theodore Pashkovsky, the future Metropolitan Theophilus of the Metropolia, visited Patriarch Tikhon in Moscow in May of 1922. At that meeting, along with the president of the YMCA, representative of the YMCA, Mr. Colton, they came to Patriarch Tikhon and requested that Archpriest Theodore, who was a widower, be made the Bishop of Chicago. Patriarch Tikhon understood this, accepted this, but he sent them to Belgrade to meet with Metropolitan Anthony because, as he said, he is not running the church outside of the borders of Russia. So then, as a confirmation of this proof, he sent them to Belgrade. They came there, met with the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, the Synod, and he was blessed to become a bishop. And then it says, in light of that expressed willfully by His Holiness Tikhon in the Synod decree, Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, about the control of the North American diocese, for the first time being taken on by Metropolitan Platon and Kherson Abadesa himself, communicated in the report of July 1922 of Archpriest Theodore Pashkovsky upon his arrival from Moscow, and in light of the agreement of Archbishop Alexander about the temporary transfer of control of this diocese to Metropolitan Platon, we decide to recognize Metropolitan Platon as the temporary administrator of the North American diocese. So the Patriarch confirms this action and then also confirms the herotonia of Archpriest Theodore to be become the Bishop Theophilus. There is evidence of this going back and forth. It seems that the church in America, which was existing prior to that, wanted to be connected with Russia, but wasn't sure how to do it. The communication just was not clear. Metropolitan Platon eventually became a permanent member of the Synod of Bishops and was trying to defend the situation that was happening in North America, especially with the lawsuits around Metropolitan John Kidrovsky and the Living Church. He wanted to show that the church in North America was the original Russian Orthodox Church and that these Living Church participants were not. In doing so, 1922, he tried at the hierarchical assembly to get a letter showing that the church was autonomous, that it existed, that it had the blessing to exist. The bishops, Metropolitan Anthony and all of those with him, did not want to give such a description for the church, it being самоуправляемое or autonomous, because they felt that this was not within its power, but also improper. But Metropolitan Platon knew that he needed to do this in order to protect the church in these lawsuits. Living in America, and as Vladika Mark mentioned not too long ago, how things are different in these countries in the West. The laws are different. I see more clearly now, especially being in church administration, how important it is to understand the laws. And unfortunately, the laws that Metropolitan Platon was dealing with lawyers and everything in the US, I think it was not understood completely here so far away. So he was not able to receive that autonomous status, but pushed on in trying to do so. In 1926, he came to the hierarchical assembly along with Metropolitan Yevlogi. They both were late to the conference, to the assembly, because they were trying to support each other in the situations happening in both of their metropolias. And when he came, he was requesting a document basically saying that the church was autocephalous, that it existed on its own. And there was a problem in the US because the church was re-registered as a church in 1924, and that instead of showing that they were the Russian Orthodox Church, actually made them look as if it was a new church and assisted in them losing several properties, including St. Nicholas Cathedral in New York City. But in 1926, the bishops decided that they could not give such an autocephalous or completely autonomous status and refused to accept that. Metropolitan Platon was very upset by this because he felt that he was not trusted by the bishops, and that mistrust probably had to do something with his earlier relationship with Metropolitan Anthony, who at one time, when Metropolitan Platon was the rector of a theological school, he was under revision by Anthony Krapovitsky and eventually lost his place as rector of that school. So there was perhaps some bad blood between them, although we don't really know. We can only suspect. Not receiving what he wanted at that council, Platon leaves the assembly of bishops, storms out, as Metropolitan Yevlogi records in his diaries. He storms out of the meeting and never comes back. Unfortunately, that was never healed, and the decision of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, of the Holy Assembly, the Assembly of Bishops, says, concerning Metropolitan Platon, the council decreed in the following days regarding his actions and the situation in the Russian Orthodox Church in North America with 9 points. 1, by not signing the protocol, Metropolitan Platon does not recognize the authority of the locum tenens. 2, that Metropolitan Yevlogi did not sign it, even though during the reading of the protocol, he agreed that all was correct in it. 3, that Metropolitan Platon is moving towards the autocephaly of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America. 4, that the decision of the Detroit Sabor about autocephaly was against the canons and is harmful for the Russian Orthodox Church in North America. 5, to require from Metropolitan Platon and his vicars a statement saying they do not accept the decision of the Detroit Sabor about the autocephaly of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America, and that they submit to the authority in Russia, the authority of the Bishops' Council of Russian Orthodox Church abroad, and its synod, since that does not compromise the submission to the locum tenens, which Russian Orthodox Church abroad submits to. 6, that if there is no answer within 4 months, Archbishop Anastasiyev, Kishinev, and Khotin be sent to North America to assess the situation and take the temporary administration of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America. 7, to require from Metropolitan Platon the acts of the 1925 Sobor and to explain that what it was about. 8, to ask Metropolitan Platon to not send the grammata he asked, or document he asked to the patriarchs, to not consider Metropolitan Platon part of the Synod of Bishops until Metropolitan Platon fulfills point 5 of this decision, as was already mentioned. Of course, he would not do this. He was trying to fulfill the will of the people. The will of the people was to be somehow separated administratively in order to protect itself. In one way, we can understand this because of the lawsuits, the problems that they were going through in North America. But at the same time, the church lives in obedience to the hierarchs. Our Lord, as we all know, appointed the apostles. He did not appoint the apostles and those people that they tended to run the church. And our hierarchs are there. This, of course, is the teaching of the church. But it's difficult in the West because we live in so-called democracy, and people like to impose this democracy on the church. Perhaps Metropolitan Platon truly was, and I believe he was, trying to protect the church, but they could not quite understand what was going on and what was necessary to do in the West, those that were here. This is a problem that continues on to this day. Metropolitan Platon eventually sent a letter to the faithful of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America, informing them that they were no longer, that ROCOR was no longer canonical, and that the Russian Orthodox Church of North America was completely self-governing. This, of course, was not accepted by the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. And they appointed Archbishop Apollinari to head the diocese in North America. It's because it took on a face of autocephaly, which could not be accepted. With the death of Metropolitan Platon, unfortunately, peace was not made at that time. Bishop Theophilus ended up becoming metropolitan, and he had a connection to the bishops there. It was dear to him to be a part of the Russian Orthodox Church and a respect. But it was also important to notice, and I feel that this played a role. As a married priest, he was married to a Serbian woman who was the niece of Saint Sebastian Dabovic, who was the head of the Serbian mission at that time. He had a connection. I'm sure he learned some Serbian. I'm sure he had this understanding and a respect. And Patriarch Varnava, who became later the patriarch after the repose of Patriarch Dimitrije, he worked diligently in order to heal these divisions because he wanted the Russian Orthodox Church to be united. He himself, having been ordained a hierodeacon and hieromonk by Metropolitan Sergius, nevertheless, he was close to Metropolitan Anthony. He was close to Metropolitan Anastasi, to the Russian hierarchs, as he lived with them and cared for them even during his time in Russia, but then again when they came, showing them his support. And it was him who insisted that they unite. Well, in 1935, they were called to Sremski Karlovci, where we were yesterday, and the patriarch insisted on a unity. And he created a plan in order to give all of these metropolitan regions a way to be united under the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. His plan was such. Patriarch Varnava created a plan for the regularization of the problems of the Russian Church diaspora, especially with regard to Metropolitans Yevrogi in Western Europe and Theophilus in North America. In regard to Metropolitan Theophilus, there was a plan having 6 points. 1, the Russian Church abroad must be divided into self-governing metropolitanates, of which one must be in America. Number 2, these circles must have a common center for decisions on questions that concern the entire Russian Church abroad and questions that cannot be answered by the circles. 3, until the reestablishment of the free Russian Church in Russia, the common center will be under the patronage of the Serbian Patriarch, so that the center will function properly. 4, that center must be organized at a conference of representatives of the circles under the auspices of the Serbian Patriarch. 5, the suspension, now this is a side note, the suspension of Bishop Arsenij Chagovets from serving must be disregarded. And 6, there must be a hierarchy of one jurisdiction in America. So this was achieved when the bishops came together, and the Serbian Patriarch insisted so. At one point, when Metropolitan Yevlogi and Metropolitan Anthony were together and forgave each other for their division from one another, after they read the prayer of absolution one on each other, they were to serve together. And they were told by many other bishops, no, you can't do it, there's an official process. And what does Patriarch Varnava say in a typical Serbian fashion, trying to make sure something happens? He says, I speak on behalf of the king, and if you do not serve together, we will take away our hospitality, and you must not remain here. Well, this was, of course, a scary thought. Where to go? What shall we do? So Patriarch Varnava was willing to put things in his own hands in order to save the Russian diaspora, a tragedy of not being Eucharistically united. Unfortunately, after this unification that took place, Metropolitan Yevlogi and the Western Metropolitanate immediately broke away again from the influence of the laity. The influence of the laity is perhaps good for checks and balances, but it can be overpowering, and these bishops were very much afraid of lawsuits. We get to that as we move on to the next phase. Now, although there was this relative unity from 1935 until 1946 with the metropolia in North America, it really didn't last too long. There was already talk and preparations for a sixth All-American Sabor in the United States at the beginning, or right before World War II. Because of the war, they were not able to have the Sabor, and instead they pushed it back. However, the desire of some, especially the clergy, not the hierarchs, who were very much considered themselves and understood themselves as Russian hierarchs, who pledged unity to the church abroad, to the Russian Orthodox Church, but also to this Holy Synod of Bishops. There was slow movements towards separation, toward having some kind of autonomy, to be directly under the Patriarch of Moscow, who at that time was Metropolitan Sergius, but who was not free. This all stopped during World War II. And after World War II, there was already discussion of another Sabor. And at that Sabor is when something tragic, in my opinion, perhaps not in the opinion of those in the OCA, but something tragic that took place. Of course, there are many, many, many more details here, but I just cannot, in the time allotted, share them all with you. Metropolitan Theophilus, he was writing to Metropolitan Anastasia, and I came across these letters in the archives of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, and he wrote to him saying to him, please pray for us as we approach this Sabor. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but please pray that God's will happens and that we can avoid a bad situation. 2 letters were sent to Metropolitan Anastasia, both with that same understanding that they're for asking for prayers. It's obvious to me, in hindsight, that he did not desire to break away, but that he was very much intimidated and afraid of the people breaking away. Vladika, Archbishop Vitaly Maximenko writes in his memoirs about this, and he believes himself that he did not want to break away, but was only afraid of more lawsuits. This is a real fear in the West, where people get sued for anything and everything. People will sue a bishop, they'll sue the church, a priest, no matter what. There's no humility in situations, specifically in the West, with laity who are perhaps not churched or not understanding how the church truly functions in obedience and in Christian love. And there are attacks, and especially having gone through this issue with the living church, there's just so much, and kind of looking for the lesser of the 2 evils, it seems to me that he eventually submitted. In 1943, when Metropolitan Sergius became the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, these people in the metropolia, many of them began to believe that the communist authorities were showing less pressure on the Moscow Patriarchate and foresaw the possible lifting of a suspension by the Moscow Patriarchate on the churches outside of Russia. So there was this desire perhaps to have an opportunity to get back together. And of course, that was the desire was always to be united with the Mother Church when she was freed. These people understood more the Russian Orthodox Church abroad as having a spiritual role more than an administrative role. But that's not what the bishops understood. And that's not what the temporary status said. It was that they were in submission to the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, and they would remain in submission until the time came.
No, did not name them. No.
Fair question. If everyone can mute themselves until I finish, please. Now, when Patriarch Alexei I was elected, these representatives from the North American metropolia were invited to come to the council, local council. However, they didn't make it in time. And they were very much frightened by the fact that they weren't allowed to serve when they arrived there. They wanted to change something about this. And so their firsthand account played a role in the break from the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. There was also a very famous memorandum of 5 professors that came out. Karpovich, Timoshov, Fedotov, Zubov, and Novitsky. They said that the Russian Orthodox Church in North America should have a desire for autonomy to be received by the Moscow Patriarchate. But this was definitely not the opinion of the hierarchy. In response from the small bishops' council, including Metropolitan Theophilus, Archbishop Vitaly, and Bishops Yeronim and Veniamin, a resolution in which it stated that the memorandum of the professors would not to be printed in periodicals because the authors, quote, the authors themselves, judging from the contents of the memorandum, are not well enough informed in church affairs. This was a joint letter and decision of the Lesser Bishops' Council. And the desire, though, was seen more and more among the people, and you know, people talk. And just because they didn't have Facebook or internet doesn't mean that the word got around on what should happen and what should be. Before that council, there was a very, to me, groundbreaking letter that was sent to Metropolitan Theophilus by a man with the name Ralph Montgomery Arkush. He was the legal counsel of the church in North America, the Metropolitanate, and he was influential in the actions. In that letter that he wrote on March 9th of 1946, he suggested a plan. And I'm going to read it in its entirety because I find it to be quite scandalous and interesting. He writes to him regarding Bishop Yeronim's travel to Geneva to participate in a hierarchical consecration of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. And he writes, quote, "If this is true, it should be stopped at once. The one great obstacle to peace in our church today is our connection with the Russian Church abroad. Your Eminence has pointed out to Metropolitan Anastasius a dignified, orderly, and sensible method of winding up its affairs, namely by merging his bishops, priests, and people into our own jurisdiction. He has declined the suggestion without discussion. In my opinion, the suggestion should be renewed with added force now that the disintegration of our church is proceeding apace. Nevertheless," and I go on, I'll skip here. "Nevertheless, our connection with that organization has this momentary value, that the Patriarchate wants so much to see the connection dissolved that we can insist on our own terms as the price of such dissolution." And I apologize, I just missed a part of it that I wanted to also say, so I'll go back to that. He says, "I can imagine no act that will create greater resentment among the great majority of Russian Orthodox people in the country than without authorization of an all-American Sabor, deliberately to prolong the life of the Russian Church abroad at a time when we have been beating our brains out to discover an orderly and humane method of liquidating that organization." I'll stop reading the letter from there. When I found this letter in the archives, I was shocked. Because, again, the church functions on obedience, and we are tied to the church through the hierarchical assembly of bishops. The laity gathering together and making a decision is a suggestion. It's not a decision. The hierarchs are those that hold the grace of the apostles, and they're the ones to make the final decision. They came to the Sabor there on November 26th, 1946, 75 years ago tomorrow, God willing. And in coming there, the sentiment was a break from the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. There was a vote, and present there was 157 clergymen and 92 lay delegates in attendance. So there were a lot of clergy, majority. And there were three main opinions at the council. One, to remain status quo as a self-governing metropolitan region under the auspices of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. Two, once again, to declare the Russian Orthodox Church in North America a fully self-governing church organization, cutting ties with the Russian Orthodox Church abroad and not submitting to the Moscow Patriarchate. Or three, to accept the Moscow Patriarch as a spiritual head of an autonomous Russian Orthodox Church in North America, cutting ties with the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. The first of these was the most rare of opinions. The second was more popular, but a majority shared the third opinion with a desire for reunification with the Moscow Patriarchate. With a vote, an overwhelming vote for this third choice to unite under the spiritual head of the Moscow Patriarch and to become autonomous, the council did decide. Metropolitan Theophilus addressed the Sabor, saying that the comments of the delegates from the previous day made it clear that the time, quote, the time has come to end ties with the synod abroad and to look for union with the Moscow Patriarchate, leaving ourselves the right to full autonomy. The Sabor came to an agreement on a resolution of the Sabor by a vote of 187 accepting the resolution and 61 rejecting it. The resolution states, quote, now therefore be it resolved that His Holiness Alexis, Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, be requested to unite us in his fold and to be our spiritual head, conditioned upon the Church in America retaining its present autonomous state and the right to self-government, that the periodic all-American Sabors of the Russian Orthodox Church of North America shall remain the supreme legislative and administrative body of our Church. At these Sabors, the Church shall continue to elect its own metropolitan and make and adopt its own laws by which the Church in North America is in all respects self-governed, end quote. And it goes on, but for the sake of time, I will not read it all. The Patriarch was sent a telegram in which he said that he generally accepts this, but has to first send his representative, and he sends his representative to the United States. Unfortunately, this representative was not received by Metropolitan Theophilus. He kept avoiding him because loyalty to the Soviet powers was requested, and at least to not speak negatively of the Soviet powers. And seeing that political nature, he decided not to meet with them and not to accept it. This posed a problem. They went from being united with the Russian dioceses abroad to being accepted by no one. This is tragic because the division not only took place, but the Russian Orthodox Church abroad no longer being in Serbia, no longer being in what Serbia or Yugoslavia was free at that time before, is now also under communist oppression. Where to get that support, where to get that re-guidance. And as we know, nothing came from it. They remained divided. But of course, several bishops, Archbishops Tikhon and Vitaly, Bishops Yasaf and Yerenim, did not accept this decision, and the Russian Orthodox Church abroad continued its work here in North America alongside the metropolia. What this meant was that there were two parallel jurisdictions, and we know this continued on even to this day, although in different statuses. Now, what caused even more stress to the situation was the arrival of the central administration of ROCOR to the United States. These two self-ruling Russian churches were on the same territory, both divided from the mother church, as two sisters walking next to each other in the desert, yet refusing to talk to one another. A sad outcome and result of a loss of contact with the Central Church authority due to the communist yoke. I could go on and on about this, so I won't, but I will come to my conclusion that the involvement of the entire Russian church body, the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, Russian Orthodox Church in North America, the Diocese of Western Europe, and the other church factions originating from the Russian church, along with the Serbian church and the other patriarchates, played a great role in the life of ROCOR, and everything that happened in it. Undoubtedly, the Serbian church was the greatest external player, and its leaders, especially patriarchs Dimitri and Varnava, were both firm supporters of the Russian church, people, and their unity. The greatest woe, however, is the church abroad. Churches abroad were unable to keep a solid peace and firm unity. The vote of the laity played too great a role in the metropolia's administrative decisions. Again, in my opinion, some people think that's a great thing. This is what caused the separation in 46. This is what caused the separation with Platon, the desire to make this decision and not necessarily have the support of the hierarchs, or the hierarchs being scared to make the right decision because of all of the problems that they would lead to. This, unfortunately, instead of having to deal with the protest and perhaps temporary disgruntlement of the lower clergy and laity, the hierarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America prematurely chose separation from its moral and administrative authority, the General Bishop's Council. When the laity separates itself from church authority, it is like a spark of fire that quickly burns out. But when a bishop separates himself, he is like a wildfire, burning everything he touches. Instead, certain people, such as Ralph Arkush and the authors of the memorandum of the five professors, played on the passions and fears of the clergy and laity, convincing them that the submission to the Soviet-oppressed church in the USSR was the proper route. This led to the uninformed decision of attempting to reunite with Moscow, which led to nothing other than isolation in the Russian church world. I will just say that I have a great love for the Russian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox churches outside of Russia as a whole. Of course, having studied in both the church abroad and at St. Vladimir's, I realize as an outsider how similar they are. Very similar. Now things have changed over time. Statuses have changed. I love and respect them both, and I think that they, in some way, could and should work together, and they are serving together in order to kind of heal this. I feel like there was never kind of an end put to the division. There was some kind of united service of the Metropolitans when it was Metropolitan Jonah and Metropolitan Hilarion serving. They did have some kind of unification, but there was never any kind of statement or decision. And of course, because being under the mother Russian Orthodox Church, it was kind of just accepted de facto by the Russian church abroad. But in order to come to some kind of conclusion, it's perhaps, or perhaps it seems too late now. I guess it's never too late. But to put some kind of finalization on what happened and some kind of brotherly love. My idea and hope was that when that first service happened, the first hierarchs would read the prayer of absolution over another, as did Evlogi and Antoni. I guess that's a little bit romantic, that idea, but it would have had a great impact, although, again, it's too late. So those are my kind of assessments and findings. That's just the tip of the iceberg of those findings from that time. Definitely the participation of the laity and the legal advisors played a huge role in this, and fear instead of the proper church decisions and activity taking place. Thank you for your time, and forgive me for going over, which I believe I did. So.